I'm writing this to free myself of some burdens I've been carrying and to seek support, as well as to possibly get some sound advice. My husband and I are both in our late 40s and have celebrated over 24 years of marriage. We are proud parents of 3 children, 2 daughters and a son. To keep our privacy intact, I won't get into too many specifics about our lives, but will share enough to make the situation clear. For the first 16 years of our marriage, we had what many would call a wonderful relationship, filled with love, laughter, and strong companionship. However, a significant turning point came during this time when an old affair from my past resurfaced. It all happened when my husband was informed about my brief and poorly thought-out affair with a former boyfriend, thanks to the ex-wife of that old flame. Let me provide some context. About 7 years into my marriage, I attended my 15-year high school reunion, and my husband joined me for the occasion. As part of the alumni committee, I returned home 6 days prior to the event. My daughters were with me, while my husband arrived just the night before the main event. We all stayed at my parents' house, which added an extra layer of nostalgia to the reunion. During the days when my husband wasn't with me, I ended up reconnecting with my first serious boyfriend, whom I will refer to as Reed. Our interactions were inappropriate and took place multiple times throughout that week. At that time, Reed was also married and had 2 children. He expressed to me that his marriage was failing and that he was unhappy, creating a false sense of understanding between us. Meanwhile, my own marriage was loving and fulfilling. In hindsight, I can see that I was perhaps trying to recapture some of the excitement and thrill from my youth. The years I spent as a mother and a homemaker in a safe and secure marriage led me to yearn for a sense of adventure, something I had been missing. I look back on those moments with a deep sense of shame. Over the 3 days we were together, we fell back into behaviors reminiscent of our high school days, all while keeping our actions hidden not just from our spouses but also from our parents. Ultimately, we realized the gravity of our mistake and ended the inappropriate contact just 2 days before the reunion. We both swore to cut off all ties and to simply move on as if nothing had ever happened. The reunion itself went smoothly, and to my surprise, I even introduced my husband to Reed and his wife. We all chatted casually for a while, and as I watched my husband standing beside Reed, I felt an overwhelming wave of guilt wash over me. I was acutely aware of the betrayal I had committed against the love of my life, whom I had always considered my greatest support. The guilt I experienced was immense, and I made a promise to myself then and there to keep my secret hidden. I didn't want to cause my husband any pain, and I was determined to make it up to him. For the next 9 years, my marriage remained nearly flawless by many measures. I felt a strong compulsion to do everything I could to ensure my husband was happy, and I devoted myself to that goal. I gave him my all, making sure that he received affection from me every day. I managed the home and took care of our children, allowing him to return from work and relax with the family. Despite the nagging guilt that lingered in the back of my mind, I found genuine joy in being a devoted wife and nurturing mother to our kids. During this time, we welcomed our son into the world, an event that brought immeasurable joy to my husband. From the moment our son was born, they developed a special bond that has only grown stronger. To credit my husband, he is an affectionate father, extending the same love and care towards our daughters as well. Life was good, and I felt like we were thriving, until the day everything changed. One afternoon, my husband came home earlier than usual and indicated that we needed to have an important conversation. Immediately, I felt a wave of anxiety wash over me, fearing that something went wrong at his job. Instead, he revealed that he had spoken to Reed's ex-wife earlier that day. As he uttered their names, my heart raced, and I could barely breathe as panic set in. He explained that she had informed him that Reed had confessed to having an affair years ago, one that involved me. As if that wasn't shocking enough, my husband went on to say that Reed's ex-wife revealed more about Reed's life, including the fact that he had been diagnosed 6 years prior with an aggressive form of Parkinson's disease. And that his condition had now advanced significantly. They had been divorced for 7 years, something I had no idea about. She continued to assist him with various tasks as his health declined because his children and she wanted to help him despite their past. This unexpected revelation left me feeling both devastated and trapped in a whirlwind of emotions. The memories of my past actions collided with the present, and I was faced with the reality of the choices I had made long ago. The affair had lost its significance in her life, yet she felt a strong moral obligation to inform my husband about it. She believed he had the right to know what had transpired, and while I agreed with her on that point, I wished she had reached out to me first. If she had done that, I could have confessed in my own way, rather than facing the shock of my husband learning about it from someone else. I knew the timing of her revelation would catch both him and me off guard, and that's exactly what happened. When I spoke to my husband, I pleaded for his forgiveness, explaining that the affair had occurred a long time ago and had negligible impact on our relationship. I tried to remind him of the beautiful life we had built together, emphasizing that he and our children were my highest priorities. Still, he was understandably upset. The hurt he felt was palpable, and he expressed deep feelings of disrespect. His anger escalated to an intensity one had never witnessed before, unleashing a torrent of offensive language, which stung as he addressed me in derogatory terms. I sat in silence, tears streaming down my face, absorbing every hurtful word. I was overwhelmed by the anguish of the situation and the realization that this man, who had always treated me with kindness and respect, was now in unimaginable pain. When he finally exhausted his outburst, he stormed out of the house, leaving me alone, unsure of what was to come next. About an hour later, he called to inform me he would return home in the evening. He told me to gather the children for a family meeting and instructed me to think carefully about what I would say to them. I couldn't help but feel anxious. I begged him not to involve them in this turmoil. My belief was that I should be the only one suffering the consequences of my actions, not our innocent children. However, he was firm in his stance, insisting they needed to hear the truth regarding their mother. He made it clear that I should not say a word to them until he arrived home. As the evening approached, I busied myself preparing dinner for the kids. My stomach was in knots, and I could hardly eat, consumed by nerves. When they inquired about their dad's absence, I told them he was working but would return soon. I also mentioned that he wanted us to have a family meeting that night, and they showed curiosity about what time it would take place. I instructed them to be ready by 8:30. I sent my husband a quick text, confirming we were ready for the meeting at the designated time, and I asked him to call so we could review our approach. However, instead of a phone call, he arrived right at 8:30, walking into the kitchen where we were gathered. His demeanor had shifted dramatically. The anger that had consumed him earlier was nowhere to be found. Instead, he was in a cheerful mood, kissing and hugging each of our children just like he always did. He took a seat and looked directly at me, asking if I wanted to start. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words failed me. Tears flowed as I expressed my inability to do it. He then took it upon himself to explain the situation to the kids in straightforward language. As he spoke, I watched my daughters begin to cry and express their anger while our 8-year-old son sat there, looking confused and frightened. They had a barrage of questions, wanting to know when this had all happened. I told them it was years ago, and I couldn't pinpoint the exact time. Then, the moment arrived that shattered my heart. My son, with tears welling in his eyes, turned to his father and asked, "Are you going to leave us?" At that moment, I began to sob, uncertain of how my husband would respond. Thankfully, instead of confirming my worst fears, he reassured our son that he wasn't going anywhere. However, he did mention that for a while, he would be sleeping in the spare twin bed in his room. He asked our son if that was okay, and to my relief, our son replied with innocent enthusiasm, "Sure, Dad." My husband took a deep breath, explaining to the kids that things were going to be difficult for some time. He wanted them to know that our relationship might not be the same as it once was, at least not for a while. He reassured them that their world would remain stable and unchanged, encouraging them to voice any concerns or discomfort they might feel, promising we would talk about it as we moved forward. That discussion marked a turning point in our lives, and from that day on, our marriage became a different story. It took nearly 13 months before we began to find our way back to each other, gradually rediscovering the connection we once had. Although intimacy did not return fully, he started to allow some physical contact, but only when he felt in the mood. For the next 3 months, our interactions were tentative. I could sense he was still grappling with the memories, and he wouldn't initiate anything. I took it upon myself to push the boundaries of what he was comfortable with. Eventually, we did begin to share love again, but it wasn't quite the same. He shared with me that whenever he looked at my face, he was reminded of my past affair, which would extinguish his excitement. While I struggled to comprehend this, my therapist reassured me that this reaction was not unusual. She explained that for some men, the path to healing involved confronting these memories in a very tangible way, creating an emotional barrier that complicated our journey back to each other. Regaining a sense of masculinity that was deeply affected by the affair is a complex emotional journey. While it may appear as though my husband's desire to reclaim his masculinity can come off as selfish or focused only on his needs, there's an undeniable allure for me surrounding those moments. It's a paradox that I can't quite explain. I find myself eagerly looking forward to those encounters, despite the underlying tension they bring. Nevertheless, I find myself yearning for a return to the past, a time when my husband was attentive and deeply caring. Back then, he consistently ensured my satisfaction in our relationship, both emotionally and physically. Recently, however, there's been a noticeable shift. I feel as though my emotions are secondary to his desires. It seems that his approach has changed, viewing me more as an outlet for his needs rather than as an equal partner in this journey together. He has even made comments indicating that he feels little obligation to reciprocate the efforts I put into our relationship. This has created a sense of unease within me, leading me to feel permanently altered by our experiences. It might sound strange, but that's the reality I've accepted over the last 3 years. Despite my acceptance of this shift, everything appeared to be progressing well until this past January. During that month, something occurred that should have been a bonding experience but instead disrupted the fragile healing we had begun to establish. The painful memories associated with the past affair resurfaced, pushing us back even further in our emotional recovery journey. My son, during dinner one evening, shared a project from his 8th grade history class. He explained that the assignment revolved around mapping our family's history in America, with the possibility of using genetic testing reports to help them explore their ancestry further. His friends were planning to use this method, and he expressed a desire to do the same. My husband, clearly interested in the idea, suggested that we should all participate. I smiled and agreed, and the evening went on with us watching a movie together. However, my mind was burdened with worry, fixated on the potential consequences of the inquiry into our family lineage. Although I believed that my husband was indeed my son's biological father, a small doubt lingered in the back of my mind. The timing surrounding my son's conception during Alumni Week, when I had been involved with both men, created a shadow of uncertainty. I know how this may sound, and I understand the judgments it invites, but I felt it was crucial to confront my thoughts openly. Later that night, after the movie, my son retreated to his room, which finally gave me the moment I needed to speak with my husband. I asked him to sit down because there was something significant I needed to communicate. I then revealed the details surrounding the affair and acknowledged the slim chance that our son might not be his biological child. The reaction was immediate and intense. My husband buried his face in his hands, followed by a piercing glare directed at me. I was filled with dread, unsure of how he would react next. He stood up, gathered a few essentials, including his shaving kit, and left the house. I pleaded with him to stay and talk it through, but he was resolute in walking out. To avoid alarming my son, I allowed him to leave without further confrontation. I attempted to reach out to him through calls and texts, but he remained silent until the next morning, when he finally called, stating he was returning home to discuss the situation. A sliver of relief washed over me. It felt like we might still navigate through this precarious moment together, building on the progress we had made. When he walked back through the door, I instinctively reached for him, urging him to look into my eyes. There was a moment of hesitation, but I held him tightly, wrapping my arms around him in a desperate plea for connection. Eventually, he met my gaze, but frustration was evident in his expression. I spoke from my heart, telling him that he was the only man I had truly loved and that I was ready to do anything necessary to reaffirm our bond. I reassured him that I was almost certain he was our son's biological father and clarified that my intent in bringing this to light was purely for full transparency. I wanted to share a possibility I felt he deserved to know about. His response was swift and cutting. He asked if I was finished, then launched into a barrage of painful questions. Why hadn't I shared this information 4 years earlier when he discovered my infidelity? Why hadn't I disclosed it 13 years ago, right after the affair ended? And perhaps the most harrowing question of all, why didn't I just refrain from cheating and be a decent wife to him and a good mother to our children? The weight of his words shattered me, and I found myself crying uncontrollably. I expressed that if I could change the past, I would, but lamentably, I could only influence the present and future with my actions moving forward. From that moment onward, he took the opportunity to explain what the future would hold for us. He laid out a plan, clarifying that every member of the family would undergo ancestry tests. The stakes were considerably high. If the test results revealed that our son was not biologically his, he would be the one to deliver that disheartening news to him. Following that revelation, he stated that he would file for divorce, and I would be expected to relinquish all claims to custody of our son, granting him full custody. This was a heavy arrangement to accept, but I agreed nonetheless, reinforcing my belief that he was indeed our son's biological father. I felt confident, yet the weight of uncertainty lingered in the air. I turned to him with a request, asking if it would be possible for us to continue sharing our bed and maintain the intimacy we once enjoyed. His response was a firm refusal, informing me that I would need to make use of the pull-out couch in our bedroom for the time being. While disappointment washed over me, I resigned myself to the situation, grateful that he was still willing to share the same space with me, even if it wasn't in the way I had hoped. As we proceeded with the ancestry tests, a wave of relief washed over me when the results confirmed that my husband was indeed our son's father. In the wake of receiving the good news, he engaged with our son, offering to assist him with a class project. My husband expressed relief at the outcome, and I began to envision a return to our previous dynamic, a time when our relationship felt stable and loving. Unfortunately, reality told a different story. I found myself still relegated to the couch, while he distanced himself from me emotionally. His interactions with me grew sparse, limited to moments when our son was present or when our daughters returned home. It became apparent that he was investing more of his time in a local hiking club, where he held the title of vice president. Most evenings, after dinner, if he wasn't with our son, he was off hiking with club members or occupied with board meetings. This pattern persisted for nearly 4 months, leaving me grappling with feelings of isolation and exclusion. I longed for the husband I had once known, the partner who shared my life before the affair had altered everything between us. In my search for solutions, I reflected on the measures I had taken to rekindle what we had lost. Despite my comprehensive efforts, the emotional barriers he had erected remained unyielding. I recognized the possibility that he may never fully forgive me for my indiscretions, yet I was open to that reality as long as we could work towards restoring the love and mutual respect that characterized our relationship in the past. My feelings for him only deepened, but I couldn't shake the fear that he had fallen out of love with me. In light of my situation, I decided to return with updates to address common questions. I shared that my previous relationship with my old boyfriend had been confined to high school. I ended it shortly after starting college, as the challenges of a long-distance relationship became too significant to manage. When I returned home, our paths crossed again during a reunion committee meeting, where I specifically chose to reach out to him, which allowed us to reconnect. This choice was intentional. At that moment, I wanted to pursue what eventually unfolded. Following that encounter, guilt weighed heavily on me, prompting personal growth in ways I hadn't anticipated. To clarify, my husband had never pressured me into anything. I had willingly participated in our shared decisions and often took the initiative. While it was disheartening to miss the affection he once lavished upon me, I had come to accept our altered circumstances. I found value in any affection he was willing to offer, as his happiness invariably influenced mine. I expressed my certainty that my husband had never strayed, citing his unwavering focus on our family. He had always been a dedicated man, an exemplary father, and a loving husband. Even though our relationship had evolved, I sensed that many women would envy what we had built together. Several months later, an update revealed more changes in our relationship. I returned to share the heartbreaking news that my husband had made the decision to pursue a divorce. As I processed the emotions that flooded me, sorrow, sadness, and an overwhelming sense of regret, I realized these feelings had been my constant companions since he shared his decision about a month and a half ago. I had done everything within my power to try to sway his choice, but he had firmly resolved to move forward with his plans. He articulated that the past 5 years had been filled with misery for him, and he assumed the same must have been true for me. I expressed my perspective, insisting that I had not experienced misery in his presence. In fact, simply being around him brought me joy. I pleaded with him to reconsider, yet it became increasingly clear that he was steadfast in his decision to start a new chapter in his life. He decided to start a new chapter in his life, and he expressed hope that I would embark on a similar journey. In a heartfelt moment, he thanked me for all the years we had shared prior to the turmoil caused by my unfaithfulness. He recognized the effort I had put into trying to mend our marriage, even when things had gotten rocky. However, he made it clear that the affair, coupled with my dishonesty and lack of transparency, had severely impacted his trust in me. Despite these challenges, he acknowledged my strengths as a mother. He expressed a desire for us to maintain a close relationship and continue being good parents to our children, even in the wake of our divorce. We are currently navigating the details of our separation outside of the court system, which will make the legal proceedings more of a formality than a battle. Our amicable relationship has even led to instances where his lawyer questioned whether we were truly committed to going through with the divorce. I voiced my own hesitations about this decision, yet I fully respect my husband's choice. We anticipate having everything finalized within the next year. One of the most daunting tasks ahead of us will be selling the family home that we built together. This house holds many memories. It's where we conceived and raised our children, making it exceptionally bittersweet to part with. While both of us will benefit financially from the sale, the dramatic rise in property prices in the area means that I will struggle to afford a new home on my own. I have begun the search for an apartment where I can start anew. My husband also has plans to secure his own place, likely one that is closer to his job. Our children are coping remarkably well, with my son being a significant source of support. He acts as a guardian angel during these trying times, providing comfort and understanding that I truly cherish. My daughters have also been supportive, but they are consumed with their school responsibilities and don't get to visit home as often as I would like. Later this year, I plan to start searching for a job, but for now, I'm taking a couple of months to focus on self-improvement. The stress of the past 5 years has taken a toll on me, resulting in weight gain and health concerns. My doctor has advised me about my high blood pressure, and I realize that I often turn to food as a coping mechanism. Unlike my husband, I haven't prioritized exercise or healthy eating, which has contributed to my recent weight struggles. My goal is to get back to the weight I was when we first tied the knot. In closing, I want to express my heartfelt thanks to everyone who has offered thoughtful responses and shown concern for my well-being. I never believed my life would be seen as interesting, but it seems to resonate with others. Please don't feel sorry for me. I have faith that I will be okay. The darkest days are behind me, and I am stepping into a more hopeful future. Who knows? My husband might have a change of heart and reconsider our situation down the line. Staying grateful is important. Transitioning to a different and exciting story. Second story. If I could share one piece of wisdom regarding the divorce process, it would be to avoid pursuing it under normal circumstances. In my situation, there wasn't anything particularly egregious to warrant such drastic measures. We spent 8 years together overall, and those years were primarily positive. Throughout our relationship, we were blessed with 4 wonderful children. Around the 5-year mark, I received a promotion at work, which shifted my perspective. I began to feel that my ex-husband was somehow holding me back from achieving greater success and a more fulfilling life. Financially, we were not in the best position, but my promotion led me to earn a higher income than he did. As my role became more demanding, I started working longer hours, while he found himself working fewer hours and spending more time at home. This dynamic created resentment within me. I found myself envious of the time he could devote to our children while I was stuck at the office. Most evenings, when I returned home, the kids were either in the midst of their bedtime routine or already asleep, which deepened my feelings of frustration. As the months passed, it became glaringly obvious that things at home weren't going well in my absence. Some nights, the dishes piled up in the sink when I came home, or I would discover that the kids hadn't had dinner yet. I felt the need to express my displeasure regardless of how small the issue seemed. I was constantly angry and found something to nitpick about, as if I needed a target for my frustration. He would assure me that he was trying harder, but he often voiced how challenging it was to be at home full-time. Ironically, that only fueled my frustration even more. Over the ensuing years, the situation continued to decline. My long hours at work persisted while he struggled to find consistent full-time employment. There never seemed to be an ideal time for him to transition into full-time work due to my demanding schedule, and this cycle contributed to the growing distance between us. My schedule was always packed, but we were in a tight financial spot, and I felt the strain every time he brought up the possibility of picking up extra hours at work. Instead of being supportive, I often turned to complaining. It was a frustrating cycle. Whenever he worked fewer hours, I grumbled about how little he was earning, and then when he offered to take on more shifts, I would start whining about how busy he was and how little time we had together. This inconsistency didn't escape his notice. He would point it out, but I dismissed his concerns, insisting he needed to figure it out for himself. Deep down, I knew this bothered him, yet I found myself using it more frequently as a convenient excuse for my own dissatisfaction in our relationship. I was harboring resentment towards him, and as a consequence, I started to withdraw emotionally. I recognized that my behavior was hurtful, but I didn't care. I felt justified in my actions. In my mind, if he truly wanted to avoid the pain of our struggling relationship, he needed to focus on making me happy. This notion only fueled my headspace as I began to engage in flirtatious conversations with another man at work. What started as casual chit-chat escalated quickly. Our work conversations bled into after-hours texting, and before long, we were exchanging pictures and videos. Eventually, we started scheming ways to steal moments alone together, and while I knew this was crossing a line, it was exhilarating in a way I hadn't felt in years. At that point in my life, I was exhausted from feeling unhappy, and the thrill of this new connection felt like a breath of fresh air. However, everything came to a head one evening when I came home to find that he had cleaned the entire house, prepared a lovely dinner, and even picked out a family movie for us to watch together. Just a couple of years earlier, such gestures would have filled me with joy and appreciation. But on that particular night, I couldn't even muster the energy to look at him. I feigned illness and retreated to bed, while he persistently checked on me, bringing me food and showing concern. The heart-wrenching effort he put into caring for me only amplified my feelings of guilt, yet it also ignited anger within me. Why should he make me feel like this? As the night dragged on, I found myself on my phone texting the other guy, seeking solace in our exchanges regardless of my husband's quiet presence. The months that followed became a blur. It seemed like everything he did became an annoyance, as if his mere existence was a bother to me. I could see the hurt in his eyes, and he would often express his frustration with my treatment of him. Instead of feeling remorse, I started purposely provoking him, ready for the inevitable confrontation. After our fights, he would often apologize for things I had accused him of, even if they were unjustified, while I never once acknowledged my wrongdoings. I felt entirely justified in my perception of him as the villain in our story. The children and my husband didn't realize it, but I was cultivating a relationship on the side and pretending it didn't affect me when my husband discovered my emotional infidelity. The sight of him holding back tears dug deep into my conscience, but I refused to let my heart soften. I chose this moment, amidst his vulnerability, to tell him that I wanted a divorce. The way he pleaded with me, desperately trying to salvage what we had left, echoed in my mind, but my resolve was firm. I wasn't interested in repair. I had already begun to distance myself emotionally. I ended things with the other man primarily out of practicality, knowing I could revisit that relationship down the road if I chose to. I recognized some of my husband's attempts to mend our marriage, but the harshness I showed him became a daily routine. I berated him for not bringing in enough money, convinced that if he could just find a better-paying job, everything would be okay. He claimed he was searching, but there was a chasm between looking for a job and actually finding one that could alter our financial situation. During this tumultuous period, I came across online communities where I began sharing my perspective on our marriage. I received overwhelming support and validation for the feelings I was experiencing, which only strengthened my belief that I was entirely justified in wanting out. As I continued posting, it became a cycle of seeking affirmation, reinforcing this narrative that my husband was not worth keeping around. I unleashed a torrent of harsh words upon him, ignoring him more often than not. My confidence in my stance grew with each interaction on these forums, and soon enough, I reached out to a lawyer. Within weeks, I filed for divorce. All the while, I continued to find solace in the online validation I received from others who echoed my disdain for my ex-husband. The divorce process itself unfolded relatively smoothly. Although my husband's only request was to not get divorced and to work on our issues, I was oblivious to his pleas. My heart had already turned cold, and I was prepared to move on without looking back. I didn't care about the consequences of my actions. Yes, he was emotionally shattered, but for me, it felt like a kind of liberation. I relished the newfound freedom to do as I pleased without that gnawing feeling of guilt weighing me down or having to answer to anyone's expectations. It was an exhilarating sensation, a brief glimpse into a life where I could make my own choices. However, that feeling of liberation didn't last long. In fact, during the first month after he moved out, I quickly encountered the reality of my situation. I missed garbage day 3 times in a row, the dishes in the sink rarely got cleaned, and the laundry piled up so high that I found myself conducting a sniff test just to see what could be worn again. My children were rarely happy during this time, which only amplified my struggles. My oldest, aware of some messages he had exchanged with another woman months prior, had begun to distance herself from me. She was acutely aware of her father's lingering desire to try to work things out, and it didn't take long for her to stop communicating with me entirely, except to express her wish to go live with him. The younger children mirrored her sentiments, openly voicing their preference to stay with their dad. I made desperate attempts to make them happy, showering them with toys and gifts, yet their moments of joy were fleeting. At work, I was also grappling with the weight of solitude. The extra hours that were once manageable became overwhelming, and I found it increasingly difficult to keep up with the demands. Eventually, I caved in and began calling my ex-husband to watch the kids. He always arrived as soon as he could, providing me with support and asking if I needed anything. Each time I returned home, I discovered clean dishes in the sink, laundry neatly folded, and sometimes even a warm dinner waiting for me. He said little upon my return, merely suggesting that I should reach out if I needed further help before he quietly left. The sadness etched on his face each time he departed was undeniable. After a couple of months, my friends encouraged me to venture out on a date. It was supposed to be a simple dinner and movie, and I was filled with initial excitement and hope for a new beginning. However, the night took a different turn. As I sat through dinner, an overwhelming sense of guilt consumed me, growing so intense that I couldn't even entertain the thought of going to the movie afterward. Just a week later, after countless tears and late-night reflections, I found myself seated on a therapist's couch, recounting the entire saga of my life over the past few months. I began with the promotion at work, thinking I had it all figured out. To my surprise, the therapist didn't share the same enthusiasm for the divorce that I had felt when I initially made the decision. I found myself visiting her office multiple times a week, sometimes even 2 or 3 times. The more I spoke, attempting to justify my choices, the more I began to unearth the underlying truths I had been avoiding. It was a heart-wrenching realization. In that initial month of therapy, I cried more than I ever had in my entire life. After investing around $2,000 in therapy sessions, it finally hit me. While my ex-husband certainly had his flaws, I bore an even heavier burden of faults. I had done terrible things and spoken hurtful words that would make anyone question wanting to be with me. Yet, here was a man who chose to stand by my side. I still vividly remember a moment during a meeting with our lawyer when he looked at me and pleaded not to proceed with the divorce. In that moment, I went ahead with it anyway, and later, I proudly shared my sense of freedom and accomplishment in leaving. Looking back now, I can see how misguided I truly was. A couple of weeks ago, I approached him as he was on his way out and tentatively asked about the possibility of reconciling. The sight of tears welling up in his eyes and rolling down his cheeks was devastating. He explained that he didn't know if he could return to what we had once shared. The pain of our separation had lingered far too long, and he feared that if we tried to reconnect, I might cause him pain again. He opened up about how he had always hoped I would come to recognize the depth of his love for me, feelings he held on to until the very moment I signed the divorce papers. He took a deep breath, releasing it with a heavy sigh, and admitted that the emotional toll had hurt him more than I could understand, leaving him unsure of ever trusting me again. I can't blame him. I broke a man who, upon reflection, was a wonderful husband. I deprived my children of the joy of having a great father at home, and I ripped them away from their loving dad. My pursuit of happiness and freedom has left me in a position where I mostly find myself at home or on the therapist's couch, grappling with all that has transpired. The lesson here is significant. It's critical to not solely rely on anyone's advice regarding divorce. If your marriage is facing tough times, take a moment for self-reflection and consider the changes you might need to make. This insight applies to both men and women. Divorce is not enjoyable, and life post-divorce is anything but easy. Watching your husband broken and witnessing your children caught in the turmoil is a reality that is profoundly painful. Watching your children struggle with unhappiness as a direct result of your decisions is an incredibly tough pill to swallow. It's one of those situations that can weigh heavily on the heart, creating a deep sense of sorrow for what could have been different. The realization that their joy is being affected by choices you've made can be gut-wrenching. It's difficult to accept that the life you envisioned for them may not be unfolding as you hoped, leading to feelings of regret and helplessness. With that in mind, I genuinely wish all of you the very best as you navigate through this challenging time. There's always hope for improvement and healing, and sometimes it takes a moment of reflection to see that your marriage might still have a chance to thrive. Taking the step to consider giving your relationship another shot could be a significant move towards creating a happier environment for your children and yourselves.
Don't forget to subscribe, like, and click on the little bell icon for notifications of new stories.